As I walked into their house, I could see the worry etched on their faces. They were pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of the situation. I took a deep breath and asked them to sit down. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my emotions in check. My sister, my nephew's mother, looked at me with tears in her eyes. "We don't know what to do," she said. "He's been ignoring us for years, and now he's in this deep debt. We're at our wits' end." I nodded, trying to process the information. "Tell me everything," I said. And so they did. They told me about how my nephew had been living beyond his means, spending money he didn't have on luxuries and unnecessary things. They told me about how he had been ignoring their calls and messages, and how he had become distant and cold. I listened, my heart sinking with each passing minute. I couldn't believe that my nephew had let things get this bad. And I couldn't believe that he had ignored me for so long. But as I looked at his parents, I knew that I had to do something. I had to help them, and I had to help my nephew. But how? I didn't know yet, but I was determined to find out. I was determined to confront my nephew, and to get to the bottom of this mess. And so, I made a decision. I would go to my nephew's house, and I would confront him once and for all. I would find out what was going on, and I would make him face the consequences of his actions. But as I stood up to leave, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. Something didn't feel right. And as I walked out of the house, I couldn't help but wonder what I was getting myself into. As I walked to my nephew's house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. I had no idea what I was going to find, or how my nephew would react to my confrontation. I had always been a calm and rational person, but this situation had me feeling anxious and on edge. As I approached the house, I noticed that the curtains were drawn, and the door was locked. I rang the doorbell, and waited for what felt like an eternity for someone to answer. Finally, the door creaked open, and my nephew stood before me, looking disheveled and exhausted. "Uncle," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice firm but controlled. "Can I come in?" My nephew hesitated for a moment, before stepping aside to let me in. I walked into the house, and was immediately struck by the mess and chaos that surrounded me. There were piles of dirty laundry, stacks of unpaid bills, and empty takeout containers scattered everywhere. "Where do I even start?" I asked, my eyes scanning the room in disgust. My nephew shrugged, looking sheepish. "I don't know, Uncle. I just haven't been able to keep up with things lately." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "We need to talk about your debt," I said. "Your parents told me that you owe $95,000. How did it get this bad?" My nephew looked down, avoiding eye contact. "I don't know, Uncle. I just made some bad decisions, I guess. I was trying to keep up appearances, and I got in over my head." I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and disappointment. "You're 30 years old, and you're still trying to keep up appearances? What's wrong with you?" My nephew looked up, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. "I was just trying to make a good life for myself, Uncle. I didn't mean for things to get this bad." I sighed, trying to compose myself. "Look, I don't care about the why right now. What I care about is how we're going to fix this. Do you have any idea how you're going to pay back this debt?" My nephew shook his head, looking defeated. "No, Uncle. I don't know. I've been trying to get a job, but no one wants to hire me. And my credit is shot, so I can't even get a loan." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. This was going to be a long and difficult road to recovery. But I was determined to help my nephew, no matter what it took. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," I said, trying to sound calm and confident. "We're going to sit down, and we're going to make a plan. We're going to figure out how to pay back this debt, and we're going to get your life back on track." My nephew nodded, looking hopeful for the first time in months. "Thank you, Uncle. I don't know what I would do without you." I smiled, trying to reassure him. "You'll never have to find out, because I'm not going anywhere. Now let's get to work." As we sat down at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of bills and financial documents, I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. This was going to be a long and difficult journey, but I was determined to see it through. But as we began to work on the plan, I started to notice that my nephew was being evasive and secretive. He would dodge my questions and avoid eye contact. And I started to wonder, what was he hiding? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. But as the hours went by, my suspicion grew. Something wasn't right, and I was determined to find out what it was. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the chaotic room, I knew that I had to confront my nephew once again. "Listen, I need to ask you something," I said, my voice firm but controlled. "Is there something you're not telling me? Something that could affect our plan?" My nephew looked up, a flash of fear in his eyes. And for a moment, I thought I saw something else, something that looked like guilt. But then it was gone, and he was smiling, looking innocent and naive. "No, Uncle," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm telling you everything. I promise." I nodded, trying to believe him. But as I looked into his eyes, I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was lying to me. And I knew that I had to keep digging, to uncover the truth. But as I sat there, surrounded by the chaos and mess of my nephew's life, I couldn't help but wonder, what was I getting myself into? I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the conversation. My nephew's denials were starting to sound hollow, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was hiding something from me. I decided to push him further, to see if I could get to the bottom of things. "Listen, I've been thinking," I said, trying to sound casual. "Maybe we should take a closer look at your finances. See if there's anything that's been missed." My nephew's eyes flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of panic. But then he was smiling again, looking relaxed and calm. "Sure, Uncle. That's a great idea. Let me just grab some papers from my room." He got up from the table and walked out of the kitchen. I watched him go, my mind racing with possibilities. What was he hiding? And why was he being so secretive? I sat back in my chair, trying to calm down. I was getting ahead of myself, I told myself. I needed to focus on the task at hand, and not let my imagination run wild. But as I sat there, waiting for my nephew to return, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something was off, and I was determined to find out what it was. My nephew returned with a stack of papers, and we spent the next few hours poring over them. But the more we looked, the more I realized that something was missing. There were gaps in his financial records, and unexplained transactions that didn't add up. I started to feel a sense of frustration, and my nephew's denials were starting to sound more and more suspicious. "Look, I don't understand this," I said, pointing to a particular transaction. "Can you explain it to me?" My nephew hesitated, looking unsure of himself. I don't know, Uncle. I think it might be a mistake." I raised an eyebrow, feeling my suspicions grow. "A mistake? How can a transaction of $10,000 be a mistake?" My nephew shrugged, looking sheepish. "I don't know, Uncle. I'll try to look into it." I sighed, feeling a sense of exasperation. This was getting nowhere. I needed to take a different approach, to try and get to the bottom of things. I decided to change tack, to try and catch my nephew off guard. "Listen, I want to ask you something," I said, trying to sound casual. "Do you know anyone who might be able to help us with this debt?" My nephew's eyes flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of recognition. But then he was shaking his head, looking blank. "No, Uncle. I don't know anyone." I leaned forward, trying to read his expression. "Are you sure? Because I could have sworn I saw a name on one of your papers. A name that looked familiar." My nephew's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of fear. But then he was smiling again, looking relaxed and calm. "Oh, you must mean my friend, Alex. He's just a buddy from college." I raised an eyebrow, feeling my suspicions grow. "Alex? I don't remember you mentioning him before. What's his last name?" My nephew hesitated, looking unsure of himself. I think it's, Smith. I nodded, trying to keep a straight face. Smith? That was a pretty common name. But something about it didn't sound right. I decided to let it drop, for now. But I made a mental note to look into it further. I was starting to get a feeling that my nephew's debt was just the tip of the iceberg. And I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. As we finished up our meeting, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something was off, and I was determined to find out what it was. I left my nephew's house, feeling more and more suspicious by the minute. I knew that I had to get to the bottom of things, to uncover the truth. And I was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. As I walked out of my nephew's house, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. I had a nagging sense that he was hiding something from me, and I was determined to find out what it was. I decided to do some digging, to see if I could uncover any information that might shed some light on the situation. I started by making a few phone calls, to see if anyone knew anything about my nephew's financial situation. But every person I spoke to seemed to be in the dark, and I was starting to get frustrated. I decided to try a different approach, to see if I could find any clues online. I spent hours searching for information, but everything I found seemed to be inconclusive. I was starting to feel like I was hitting a brick wall, and I didn't know what to do next. Just as I was about to give up, I received a call from an unknown number. Hello? I answered, not recognizing the voice on the other end. Is this, Uncle? The voice asked, hesitantly. Yes, it is, I replied, trying to place the voice. Who is this? My name is Alex, the voice said. I'm a friend of your nephew's. I felt a surge of excitement, realizing that this must be the Alex my nephew had mentioned earlier. What can I do for you, Alex? I asked, trying to sound casual. I just wanted to talk to you about your nephew, Alex said, hesitantly. I know he's been in some financial trouble lately, and I was wondering if you knew anything about it. I leaned forward, my heart racing with excitement. What do you know about it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Well, I know that he's been getting some money from somewhere, Alex said. But I don't know where it's coming from. And I'm starting to get worried. I felt a chill run down my spine, realizing that Alex must be talking about the mysterious transactions I had found on my nephew's financial records. What makes you think that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I've seen some of the emails he's been getting, Alex said. They're from some company I've never heard of, and they're always talking about large sums of money. I felt my mind racing, trying to piece together the clues. This was starting to sound like a much bigger problem than I had initially thought. Do you have any idea what's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. No, I don't, Alex said. But I'm starting to get worried. I think your nephew might be in over his head. I nodded, feeling a sense of determination. I was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. Thank you for telling me, Alex, I said. I'll look into it and see what I can find out. Alex hesitated, before speaking up again. Uncle, I need to tell you something else, he said. Something that might sound crazy. I leaned forward, my heart racing with anticipation. What is it? I asked. I think your nephew might be in danger, Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a chill run down my spine, realizing that this was starting to sound like a much more serious problem than I had initially thought. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm not sure, Alex said. But I've seen some strange people around his house, and I've heard some rumors about some shady dealings. I felt my mind racing, trying to piece together the clues. This was starting to sound like a much bigger problem than I had initially thought. I was determined to get to the bottom of it, no matter what it took. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I listened to Alex's words. Shady dealings? Strange people around my nephew's house? This was starting to sound like a recipe for disaster. I knew I had to act fast, to get to the bottom of things before it was too late. Alex, I need you to tell me more, I said, my voice firm and urgent. What kind of rumors have you heard? And what do you mean by shady dealings? Alex hesitated, and for a moment, I thought he was going to clam up. But then he took a deep breath and began to speak. I've heard that your nephew has been involved with some pretty unsavory characters, he said. People who are into some pretty heavy stuff. I don't know what it is, but I know it's not good. I felt my heart racing as I listened to Alex's words. What kind of people was my nephew involved with? And what kind of heavy stuff were they into? I knew I had to find out, and fast. Alex, I need you to tell me everything you know, I said, my voice firm and commanding. I need to know what's going on, and I need to know now. Alex nodded, and began to speak. Okay, uncle, he said. But you have to promise me one thing. You have to promise me that you'll be careful. I nodded, my heart racing with anticipation. I promise, Alex, I said. I'll be careful. Now tell me what you know. Alex took a deep breath, and began to speak. I've seen your nephew with some pretty rough-looking guys, he said. Guys who look like they've been around the block a few times. And I've heard them talking about some pretty shady stuff. They're into some kind of scam, uncle. I don't know what it is, but I know it's not good. I felt my mind racing as I listened to Alex's words. A scam? What kind of scam? And how was my nephew involved? I knew I had to find out, and fast. Alex, I need you to tell me more, I said, my voice firm and urgent. I need to know what kind of scam they're into, and I need to know how your nephew is involved. Alex hesitated, and for a moment, I thought he was going to clam up. But then he took a deep breath and began to speak. I don't know all the details, uncle, he said. But I do know that it's something big. Something that could get your nephew into a lot of trouble. I felt my heart racing as I listened to Alex's words. Trouble? What kind of trouble? And how could I protect my nephew from it? I knew I had to act fast, to get to the bottom of things before it was too late. I decided to pay a visit to my nephew, to see if I could get him to talk. I arrived at his house, and knocked on the door. But when he answered, he looked nervous and on edge. Uncle, what are you doing here? He asked, his voice trembling. I need to talk to you, son, I said, my voice firm and commanding. I need to know what's going on, and I need to know now. My nephew hesitated, and for a moment, I thought he was going to try and brush me off. But then he nodded, and stepped aside. Okay, uncle, he said. Come on in. I walked into the house, my heart racing with anticipation. I was determined to get to the bottom of things, no matter what it took. And I was willing to do whatever it took to protect my nephew from harm. As I walked into the house, I could feel the tension in the air. My nephew was clearly nervous, and I could tell that he was hiding something from me. I decided to get straight to the point, to see if I could get him to open up. Son, I know something's going on, I said, my voice firm but calm. I know you're involved in something that's got you spooked. And I want to know what it is. My nephew hesitated, looking around the room nervously. I could tell that he was trying to decide whether to come clean or to keep lying. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. Okay, uncle, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll tell you. But you have to promise not to get mad. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. I promise, I said. Just tell me what's going on. My nephew took a deep breath, and began to speak. I've been involved in some business deals, he said. Deals that I shouldn't have been involved in. And now I'm in trouble. I felt a surge of anger, but I tried to keep it in check. What kind of business deals? I asked, my voice firm but controlled. My nephew hesitated, looking around the room nervously again. I don't know if I should tell you, he said. But I think you have a right to know. I've been involved in some shady dealings. Deals that involve some pretty unsavory characters. I felt my heart racing as I listened to my nephew's words. Shady dealings? Unsavory characters? This was starting to sound like a recipe for disaster. What kind of characters? I asked, my voice firm and commanding. My nephew hesitated, looking around the room nervously once again. I don't know if I should tell you, he said. But I think you have a right to know. There's some pretty bad people, Uncle. People who will stop at nothing to get what they want. I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened to my nephew's words. Bad people? Who would stop at nothing? This was starting to sound like a nightmare come true. I knew I had to act fast, to get my nephew out of this situation before it was too late. Son, I need you to tell me everything, I said, my voice firm and urgent. I need to know what's going on, and I need to know now. My nephew nodded, looking relieved that he could finally come clean. Okay, Uncle, he said. I'll tell you everything. But you have to promise to help me. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. I promise, I said. Just tell me what's going on. My nephew took a deep breath and began to speak. It all started a few months ago, he said. I was in a tight spot financially, and I didn't know what to do. So I turned to some friends who offered to help me out. I felt a surge of anger, but I tried to keep it in check. What kind of friends? I asked, my voice firm but controlled. My nephew hesitated, looking around the room nervously once again. I don't know if I should tell you, he said. But I think you have a right to know. There's some pretty shady characters, Uncle. People who are involved in some unsavory activities. I felt my heart racing as I listened to my nephew's words. Shady characters? Unsavory activities? This was starting to sound like a recipe for disaster. I knew I had to act fast, to get my nephew out of this situation before it was too late. As my nephew finished speaking, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, sadness, and disappointment all battled for dominance. But as I looked at my nephew, I saw the fear and desperation in his eyes, and my heart went out to him. I knew that he had made a mistake, but I also knew that he was not beyond redemption. Son, I'm sorry, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. I'm sorry that I wasn't there for you when you needed me. I'm sorry that I didn't see the signs of trouble earlier. But I'm here for you now, and I'll do everything in my power to help you get out of this mess. My nephew looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Thank you, Uncle, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for believing in me. I don't know what I would do without you. I pulled my nephew into a tight hug, holding him close as he sobbed. I knew that he was going to be okay, that he was going to make it through this difficult time. And I knew that I was going to be right there with him, every step of the way. As we hugged, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I had finally gotten to the bottom of things, and I had finally been able to help my nephew. It had been a long and difficult journey, but it had been worth it in the end. But just as I was starting to feel a sense of relief, I heard a knock at the door. I looked up to see the police standing there, their faces stern and serious. Uncle, I think we need to talk, one of the officers said, his voice firm but respectful. I nodded, knowing that this was the moment of truth. I knew that my nephew's actions had consequences, and I knew that he was going to have to face them. But as we sat down to talk, I realized that the officers were not there to arrest my nephew. They were there to tell him that the people he had been involved with had been caught, and that they were going to be brought to justice. My nephew looked up at me, a mixture of relief and shame on his face. Thank you, Uncle, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for being there for me. I smiled, feeling a sense of pride and love for my nephew. Anytime, son, I said. Anytime. As the officers left, I looked at my nephew and saw a sense of hope in his eyes. He knew that he had a long way to go, but he also knew that he was not alone. He knew that I was there for him, and that I would always be there to support him. And as we hugged again, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I knew that my nephew was going to be okay, that he was going to make it through this difficult time. And I knew that I was going to be right there with him, every step of the way. The days that followed were difficult, but they were also filled with hope. My nephew and I worked together to rebuild his life, to find him a new job and a new sense of purpose. And as we worked, I could see the weight lifting off his shoulders. I could see the fear and desperation in his eyes begin to fade, replaced by a sense of hope and determination. And as I looked at my nephew, I knew that I had finally found the closure I had been searching for. I had finally been able to help him, to guide him through the darkest of times. And I knew that I would always be there for him, no matter what. The months that followed were a blur of activity, as my nephew and I worked together to rebuild his life. We faced challenges and setbacks along the way, but we also faced them together. And as we did, I could see my nephew growing stronger, more confident. And finally, the day came when my nephew was able to stand on his own 2 feet. He had a new job, a new sense of purpose, and a newfound sense of confidence. And as I looked at him, I felt a sense of pride and love that I had never felt before. "Thank you, Uncle," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for being there for me. I don't know what I would do without you." I smiled, feeling a sense of joy and satisfaction. "Anytime, son," I said. "Anytime." And as we hugged, I knew that I had finally found the closure I had been searching for. I had finally been able to help my nephew, to guide him through the darkest of times. And I knew that I would always be there for him, no matter what. The years that followed were filled with happiness and joy. My nephew and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the trials we had faced together. And as I looked at him, I knew that I had finally found the closure I had been searching for. I had finally been able to help my nephew, to guide him through the darkest of times. And I knew that I would always be there for him, no matter what. And as I looked back on the journey we had taken, I knew that it had been worth it. I had finally been able to find the closure I had been searching for, and I had finally been able to help my nephew. And as I smiled, feeling a sense of peace and contentment, I knew that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along.